Brothers and sisters, wherever you sit right now, in your living room, in traffic, in a crowded cafe, or in a quiet room where your thoughts echo louder than the world, listen closely. Something is shifting beneath our feet. A movement that began as a whisper is growing into a wave powerful enough to tilt the balance of nations. For decades, the world believed America was the final destination. The dream, the shining city. The place where every ambition, no matter how big or wild or impossible, could unfold. People from everywhere fought for a glimpse of that promise. But today, the once packed table is still there, the silverware still shining, the lights still glowing, but the chairs are emptying. Quietly, steadily, unmistakably. A new chapter is writing itself. African Americans from every walk of life, families, entrepreneurs, professionals, dreamers, are making a decision many never imagined. They are leaving America and returning to Africa. Not for vacation, not for a quick escape, but to rebuild their lives on soil that carries their roots. A woman in her 30s summed it up better than any report ever could. Standing in her 3-story townhome with her car keys in one hand and her resignation letter in the other, she said, "We had everything people said we should want, but it didn't feel like life. It felt like noise." Across the United States, the signs of decline flicker like warning lights. Tourism spending drops by billions. Airlines cancel hundreds of flights. Shutdowns stretch longer and longer. The FAA cuts air traffic at the busiest airports. Travelers stranded. Tens of thousands delayed. And while chaos fills American terminals, African airports grow busier with a different kind of passenger one, carrying memory, hope, and history. From California to Illinois to New York, people feel something breaking. Housing prices skyrocket, taxes smother families, crime grows, public services crumble, neighborhoods once alive feel hollow. People aren't fleeing a lack of liberty. They're leaving because the life they were promised no longer exists. And for African Americans, there is another truth, one painful, one old, one heavy. Go back to Africa. A phrase thrown like a weapon for generations. But now, thousands have turned that insult into a compass. They are going back, not because they were pushed, but because they finally have a place to go that wants them. Families like Halisa and Pabsul, who left a tense America for Dakar, seeking calm, connection, and home. "Why are we so afraid to leave?" they asked. The answer came as soon as they landed. They were never meant to stay somewhere that never made room for them. Meanwhile, symbols of America's comfort collapse. Fast food giants closing stores everywhere, prices doubling, franchises shutting down, an empire built on convenience struggling to breathe. At the same time, African Americans began asking questions that generations before them were too exhausted to ask. What if the American dream wasn't meant for us? What if home isn't tragedy, but possibility? What if Africa is not the past, but the future? YouTuber Austin Holloman didn't hide his shock after moving to Kenya. "I feel safe here," he said. Back home, it felt like the system was snapping apart. His words echoed across millions of screens. And the airports felt the ripple. Atlanta, New York, Los Angeles. Boarding gates flooded with people packing their lives into 23-kilogram bags. Not for Europe, not for Asia, not for the Caribbean, but for Ghana's warm sunlight, Rwanda's clean streets, Kenya's rising tech cities, Nigeria's booming markets, Tanzania's peaceful coasts. It was more than travel. It was return. Washington felt uneasy. A country built on the belief that its dreams were unmatched now watched its own citizens, its innovators, its creators, its culture makers walk toward another horizon. Online, entire communities formed. Forums, live streams, Zoom meetings, diaspora groups discussing land, identity, safety, legacy. Information once hidden, now shared freely. African nations saw the wave coming and opened their doors. Special residency programs, diaspora investment zones, fast-track citizenship, land ownership frameworks. Ghana's year of return was just the spark. What followed was a wildfire. Families sold their homes, withdrew their savings, relocated their companies, and booked one-way flights. They were not fleeing, they were choosing. The movement became economic, then political, then generational. Washington analysts began to worry, not because people were leaving, but because of who was leaving. Doctors, tech workers, scholars, creatives, people whose skill sets built industries and shaped culture. A loss like that cuts deeper than any statistic. Across Africa, new communities formed overnight. African American neighborhoods in Accra, innovation hubs in Nairobi, art districts in Johannesburg, schools built by returnees, clinics staffed by diaspora doctors, media houses producing African global content. Africa was not being rescued. Africa was being rebuilt by its children. African presidents recognized the moment and moved fast. Regional coalitions formed. New diaspora councils emerged. Investment-friendly environments multiplied. The results were undeniable. Diaspora capital flowed into Africa like rivers feeding a fertile land. Manufacturing sectors grew. Tech industries flourished. Agribusiness expanded. Tourism soared. Africa's GDP climbed, powered not by foreign aid, but by its global family. Meanwhile, America faced a different reality. For generations, African Americans shaped its culture, its music, its fashion, its spirit. They were the heartbeat of American creativity. But now, that heart was finding a new rhythm, one played on African soil. Washington's political institutions recognized the symbolic blow. America's identity relied on its diversity narrative. But when millions of African Americans leave by choice, that story begins to collapse. And the world notices. European allies tracked the trend. Asian nations invested heavily in Africa's rise. Middle Eastern nations expanded partnerships. Africa was no longer waiting for an invitation to global influence, it was taking its seat. In Africa, the returnees rediscovered something they never felt in America: unfiltered belonging. No suspicious glances, no silent barriers, no constant pressure to explain their existence. For the first time, they were simply home. African cities transformed culturally. Fashion, music, storytelling, and technology merged into a new Afro-global identity. Strong, confident, visionary. A culture that didn't imitate the world, but inspired it. Back in the US. Mainstream media downplayed the movement, but independent platforms told the truth. Doctors opening hospitals in Nigeria, teachers launching schools in Kenya, filmmakers producing Afro cinema in Ghana, Black families living safer, freer, and wealthier lives than they ever did in the US's. The evidence became too loud to ignore. America began feeling the pressure. Tax bases shrank. Entrepreneurs left. Professionals moved. College enrollment dipped. Tech companies quietly admitted, "We are losing Black talent to Africa." Washington held hearings behind closed doors. But solutions were thin. The exodus wasn't about money, it was about dignity. Across Africa, the diaspora began reshaping everything. Education systems introduced new Pan-African syllabi. Engineers launched AI and renewable energy startups. Agricultural innovators rebuilt food systems. Digital trade networks connected continents directly. The African Union launched the Global African Prosperity Network, an initiative powerful enough to rival Western institutions. Billions were mobilized. Africa no longer drafted plans for approval. It wrote its own destiny. By the time America fully realized what was happening, Africa had already risen. African blockchain systems linked to diaspora banks. New international airlines expanded transatlantic routes. Innovation cities grew faster than Western analysts could track. African culture dominated global entertainment. Afro beats, Afro cinema, Afro fashion. The world danced to Africa's rhythm. What the West once labeled brain drain became Africa's greatest brain gain. Millions returned home. Millions more planned to. The world recalibrated around Africa's rise. And through it all, one truth stood unshakable. The American dream didn't die. It simply moved. It crossed the Atlantic. It returned home. And Africa, after centuries of silence, finally stepped into its power. This was not a revolution of violence, not a rebellion of anger, not a protest of the streets. This was a revolution of return, a movement of identity, a reawakening of destiny, and history will remember it